Lord, hear the cry of our hearts. Come, O conquering. And every eye will see your glory fill the sky. Adonai, Adonai, every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. Adonai, Adonai, you alone are God. Every tongue will cry, Adonai. Hear Jerusalem waits, praises lifted on high. Hear the beautiful gates long to see you arise. When all of Zion sings, Baruch haba Hashem. Adonai, Adonai, every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. Adonai, Adonai, you alone are God. Every tongue will cry, Adonai, Adonai, every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. Adonai, Adonai, you alone are God. Every tongue will cry, Adonai. You are Lord over all the earth. 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 Sing this. Who was and who is to come? Who was and who is to come? Hashem, every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. Adonai, Adonai, you alone are God. Every tongue will cry, Adonai, Adonai, every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. Adonai, Adonai, you alone are God. Every tongue will cry, Adonai.
your promise. You don't speak in vain, no syllable empty your voice. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you so alive, oh, it's so alive. If the stars are made to worship so alive, if the mountains bow in reverence so alive, if the oceans roar your greatness so alive, for if everything exists to lift you high, so alive. If the wind goes where you send it, so alive. If the rocks cry out in silence, so alive. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chase down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you so alive, I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender so alive, I can see your heart 8 billion different ways. Every precious one
restore every heart that is broken. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Give life, and you give life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope, and you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Sing great. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Sing all the earth. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth and all the You're perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. Perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways to us. 'Cause you're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're perfect. You are perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways to us.
Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Holy, holy is He. Sing a new song to Him who sits on heaven's mercy seat. Sing that again. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Holy, holy is He. Sing a new song. Sing a new song to Him who sits on heaven's mercy seat. Holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Clothed in rainbows, clothed in rainbows of living color, flashes of lightning, roars of thunder. Blessing and honor, strength and glory and power be to you, the only wise King. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Yeah. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Filled with wonder, filled with wonder, awestruck wonder at the mention of your name, filled with wonder, filled with wonder, awestruck wonder, at the mention of your name, we're filled with wonder, filled with wonder, awestruck wonder. One more time, holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. The mountains shake before him, the demons run and flee. At the mention of the name, King of Majesty, there is no power in hell or any who can stand before the power and the presence of the great I am. The great I am, great I am.
Mountains shake before you, the demons run and flee. Oh, at the mention of his name, King of Majesty, there is no power in hell, nor any who can stand before the power and the presence of the great I am. The great I am, the great I am. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
up your voices. God Almighty, the great I am, who is worthy, none beside thee. God Almighty, the great I am. One more time, hallelujah, hallelujah. Holy, holy, God Almighty, great I am, who is worthy, none beside God Almighty, great I am. There's no one like you in all the heavens and all the earth, Lord. All of creation bows before you. Your praises ringing throughout all of the universe. We look forward to the day when we will stand before you, fall at your feet, and pour out our love like never before, and join with all of heaven saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Thank you, Father.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Hashem, Yahweh.
So, our special dance offering is a little bit different this year. For my sisters and I, dance has become a part of our worship, and so we are excited about dance, and we want everybody else to be just as excited about dance and worship as we are. So we thought we had done this dance right before Sukkot at our congregation, and it was really powerful for our congregation and for us. And it's the song Zion by Aaron Schust, which is basically a song that he came up with talking about the promises in the scripture to Israel and bringing Israel back to Israel, to the land. So as part of Israel, I invite you all to take part and stand, to come and dance with us if you are so desiring of that, which we would really love to see that. We're going to show you the steps to the dance. It's fairly simple, and if you have 2 left feet, you can still dance. And even if you don't have all the steps right, you can still dance. The part is listening to the words, and having that heart attitude of worship and praise to our Heavenly Father and thankfulness for His promises and taking hold of those promises. So, as a daughter of Zion, and there are sons of Abraham here, I invite you to come and dance with us. So, Charity, not sure where. We're going to just run through the dance really quick, and I invite you all to stand up, to come forward, and you can see it a little bit better, and then you can just step right into the dance. That would be perfect. So, oh, my sister just reminded me too, with dance, there's a unity with dance, that we all individually are coming and putting our own little spin to it, but in the circle, it's a unified worship, coming together and saying, we as a community are going to be in unity. So,
we did this one time with another group, and the entire group got up and danced the entire dance, and it was beautiful. We didn't have it all together, and not everybody knew the steps. There was a couple people that were stumbling around, But you look around and there was not one person sitting. It was beautiful to see that unity in worshiping, in moving your whole body. There's something powerful about that. So, okay, if you've ever done the Dance with Me by Paul Wilbur, it's the exact same dance. You're just gonna do a Cherkazaya, and then you're gonna do kind of a half mayim with a pause. Then you're gonna go the other way, half mayim with a pause. Then you go step forward, step back, and then you're gonna turn to the right, turn to the left, and that's the whole dance. You're gonna go back, and that's it. So if you think you're capable of that, and even if you don't think you're capable of that, come on up.
So as you can see, everyone's getting ready. No, you can go right here. Okay.
Very exciting to see unity being manifested.
Yeah, claim your promises, the young lady was saying. All right, so there are a lot of people up there. Probably about
3/4.
Yeah, look like 3/4 of the people are up front. You can see them out there and what you're seeing there. So this is awesome. So since I'm just trying to give you a play-by-play description of what's going on. So there's going to be a dance, a community dance, if you will, a community dance. Simple steps, and everyone's invited to join in this special presentation of a sacred dance.
All ages, all sizes, male and female. That's awesome.
Wow. Powerful, powerful song. Thank you very much, ladies, for putting that together and encouraging us to partake. Very good, very good. All right. Again, thank you all very much. Feeling very stirred, as I trust you are, Sal. All right, I'd like to at this time once again invite our brother Bill to come up and share with us on the topic of community, probably unity within the community in the end days. And so, Bill, if you would, please.
Well, good afternoon. That's what I thought. Good afternoon. Man, we've had lunch. The lights have been out. It's night time, right? All righty. Well, tough. You got to listen to me for a little while. Yeah. All right. I'm pleased that the way things were kind of orchestrated. Melody and Brandon and I didn't confer about what they were going to do. They didn't ask what I was going to do. And then the dance here and the message of the dance kind of helps us to segue into what I want to talk about now, because if there's going to be unity in the community, there has to be a community. And for that to happen, there has to be a return. There has to be a gathering. And so I'm going to, in a kind of a little bit of a different way, I'm going to speak to that issue now. And we're going to start out in Genesis chapter 3. And something that happened a long time ago that sets or establishes a principle that we see recurring throughout the scripture. And for the sake of time, I won't read it. But in Genesis chapter 3, we know how that the woman engaged in a conversation with the serpent, who personally I don't believe was supposed to be there. That's because the man did not guard the garden. He was to tend it and to keep it, literally to guard it. So had he been diligent in guarding the garden, that serpent may not have been there. And if the serpent wasn't there, then the woman can't have a conversation with the serpent. And if that doesn't happen, then things turn out a lot differently. And so it is really crucial that we heed the words of Moses when he told the children of Israel, take heed that you keep all these things that have been commanded to you, not just partially. Because that one little thing that you don't think is as important as it should be is the very thing the adversary may exploit. It's kind of like the parable of the wheat and the tares. Man has a field, and he's going to go sow good seed in that field, which, by the way, is the parable of the sower. The good seed is the word of God. So he's going to sow good seed in that field, the word of God, if you will. It's going to produce wheat, but an enemy came into his field when it was dark. And while men were sleeping, he sowed tares, this poisonous seed, in the midst of the wheat, and that created a problem. Now, my question has always been, well, if you work in a field, presumably you do it during the day, and it starts getting dark, you quit, you go home, you have dinner, you get ready for bed. Why were there men in that field at night? They were supposed to be guarding it. They were supposed to be protecting it, because the owner of the field knew that there was an adversary out there whose nature is aggressive. He's unrelenting in his attacks, and his nature is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Now, the owner of the field, that is the creator, could have protected it because he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, however he wants, but he has chosen from the beginning to work through people. And so he delegated the responsibility to guard that which had been entrusted to them, that is the garden, against the adversary. The man didn't. He had a conversation with the woman. You know the rest of the story. And so when that had happened, the creator came into the garden, the breezy part of the day. He speaks to the man. His response is, well, the woman you gave me, she gave me this fruit and I ate it. Pretty accurate. Turns to the woman, he speaks to her. And then he turns to the serpent and says, and because you've done this thing, you're going to go on your belly all the days of your life and you'll eat dust. And then in verse 15, he says this, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. I'm going to sound like I'm about to do a flip-flop on everything I've just talked to you about today and last night. But as much as there is the call for us to walk in unity with brethren, at the same time, we need to understand that we are at war. Now, it's not supposed to be that we're at war with one another. It's supposed to be that we're at war with the adversary and the serpent's seed. So we are in a state of war. Enmity, it means hostility. It means war. I'm going to put a state of war between the serpent and the woman and between their two respective seeds. And this warfare is going to continue until it says the seed of the woman is going to come and bruise your head. I like to use the word crush, like destroy. And in the process, you will bruise his heel. Now, of course, ultimately it's talking about the Messiah and how he would come and he would bruise the head of the serpent and in the process have his heel bruised, literally so, because when he hung upon that tree and they drove spikes through his feet, my understanding is that historically the heel bone was penetrated with this spike, and so his heel literally would have been bruised. But according to 1 John 3, By hanging on the tree, being buried, and rising again on the third day, he destroyed the works of the devil. Right? I'm waiting. Come on. Wake up. He destroyed the works of the devil. And since that day, you and I have not had to deal with Satan. No. He's still out there. He's still at work. He's still seeking to steal, kill, and destroy. So what's up with that? Messiah is the head of the body. And he has already overcome the world. And therefore he has given you and I the authority, the ability, and by his Spirit, the power to overcome the world. Which is to say that we have been given the authority to trample on scorpions and serpents. Now, a long time ago, and even to some degree today, there are those who believe that this power to trample on serpents means that we should run out into the woods, get a bunch of rattlesnakes, put them in a box, and bring them into church and handle them and quote the Gospel of Mark. Sorry, if that's your game, I'm out of here. All right? I'm not doing that. That's not what he's talking about, right? What is he saying? That if we take up our cross and follow him, I'm going to walk in his footsteps. The steps of a good man are ordered of God. I want to put a little bit finer point on it, if I may. In terms of the heel, the prophecy is that the Messiah would take his heel and he would step on the head of the serpent. And then he'd take another step, and if he encountered that serpent again, he'd step on the serpent. Anything that came against him, he would step on it. He may have his heel bruised, but he would step on it. And that, if you and I are following in his footsteps, maybe even better yet, heel prints, I'm going to take my heel, and I'm going to put in the impression that his heel has already left. And then I'm going to take another step, and I'm going to put my heel in the impression that his heel left. And if I encounter that serpent, because he's overcome the world, I can too. And I can take my heel and I can put it on the head of that snake. You understand what I'm saying here? Okay, the serpent was defeated, but he didn't throw up the white flag and slither away. He's been trying to overcome that prophecy. He's been trying to even reverse that prophecy. But if we're walking the way we're supposed to walk, following the Messiah, we have that authority to trample on scorpions and on serpents. Because as Israel, well, when Jacob was given the name Israel, he was given a distinctive walk at the same time. I like to say that's when Jacob was born again. He got a new name and he got a new walk. And who gave him that walk? The Creator did. And that walk identified him as Israel. And so he's given that name because you have struggled with man and God and have prevailed. And so as Israel, we have a distinctive walk. And we're supposed to be on a one and only path that leads to life. And as we walk that path, as we walk that road, if a serpent crosses our path, we have the authority to trample on him. But now, like I said, ever since that time, the adversary's been trying to reverse that decision. He didn't throw up the white flag. He didn't surrender. He's been fighting it tooth and nail. And I'm of the opinion, and have been for a long time, that since this prophecy was given him, he's been trying to figure out how to undermine it. He's been trying to figure out how to reverse it. For instance, in Genesis chapter 4, right after this prophecy is given to the serpent, we see the birth of Cain and Abel. And one day Cain brings an offering of the fruit of the ground. It was rejected. God accepts Abel's offering of the fruit of the ground. And then Cain is despondent. He's all upset about it. And so God goes and speaks to him and says, now, why are you upset? You know what to do. Why don't you do the right thing? And you know the story, how he lures Abel out into a field and he kills him. The tradition is that he took some kind of heavy instrument, a rock, some people say, and he struck him over the head. He bludgeoned him to death. In other words, he struck him in the head. Because in that part of the world, even to this day, when you want to show that you have vanquished your enemy, you take your heel and you put it on his head. How many of you remember in the Second Gulf War, Saddam Hussein has skipped town. Our troops are going into Baghdad, and there was this town square. There was this big statue of Saddam Hussein, and some heavy equipment came in and pulled it down. And then all the men that were there started taking off their shoes, and with the heel of their shoe, they began to strike that statue over the top of its head. Where did they get that idea from? Genesis chapter 3. Because when you want to show you have overcome your adversary, you take your heel and you put it on his head. So the adversary has been trying to take his heel and put it on our head. And this really begins to develop for us in Genesis chapter 25, when we see that Rebekah has been barren for 20 years. Isaac prays for her. He intercedes for her. She conceives. She gets pregnant. She realizes something strange is going on inside of her womb. She goes to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord tells her, you've got two nations growing inside your womb. They're not going to get along. They're not going to coexist. I like to emphasize that because we live in a day and time when everybody talks about we need to coexist. And if you've got a blue bumper sticker on the back of your car out there that says coexist, just don't let me see it. Because that's what the world wants us to do. But God said that Jacob, or these two children growing inside of her womb, were not going to coexist. They were not going to get along. In fact, they were always going to be vying for superiority. One might rise up, the other would be lessened. The other might rise up, the other would grow less in strength. And so they're going to be going back and forth. But the prophecy was that in the end, the older one would end up serving the younger one. So then, when in Genesis chapter 25, Rebekah delivers these children, it says that indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first one came out all ruddy, hairy, looked like he was wearing a coat. That would have freaked me out. Yeah, I'm going to get into it, Brandon. I'm going to tell this story. I've told it for years and years and years, but I might as well do it one more time. When Brandon's our firstborn, and make a very long story short, his head got stuck in the birth canal. He had a big head. Sometimes he still does. Just playing. His head got stuck in the birth canal. And so Beth was in labor all this time. The baby was stuck, and they're trying to work with her, try to get the baby born. And finally, the doctor walks over to me and he says, Mr. Cloud, I'm afraid we're going to have to operate. I'm like, cut her, do it now. Let's do this. Let's get this over with. Because I was just walking around going, of course, she's over there in this awful pain. So finally, they take Beth into surgery, and they deliver the baby. And then they brought him into the nursery. And, they were doing all the things that they do to newborns and such. And finally, the nurse motioned for me to come into the nursery, and she put that little baby in my hands. And I, saw this little me looking at me. And he was blinking his eyes, and he did doing his mouth like that. And when I saw that, it really hit me. Wow, I actually am a dad. And it just hit me. And I just started bawling. I just started crying, holding this little fella, And then the blanket fell off his head. He had a cone head. And this is what I said to the nurse. Oh no, I'm going to have to name him Beldar. So some of you are old enough to get that, all right? So anyway, can you imagine how I would have responded if my firstborn son come out so hairy, looked like he was wearing a coat? All right, so this is something kind of unusual going on. And so Esau is his name, and he is born ruddy, hairy. He looks like a miniature man. And then his brother is born after him. And it says that when his brother was born, his hand was on Esau's heel. And from this point forward, we have a rabbinic concept that is known as the battle of the heel. And that's something we need to try to remember, try to internalize. The battle of the heel. We are in a war, and this war is personified in the struggle between Esau and Jacob. Now, there are many scholars who argue that the name Yaakov or Jacob, it means supplanter, it means trickster, it means deceiver, he's a cheater, all these kinds of things. But in reality, the name Yaakov is derived from the word heel. If you know Hebrew, it's ayin, kuf, beit, akiv, or heel, H-E-E-L. And then the Hebrew letter called yod. And yod is the smallest Hebrew letter. It would be a jot in your New Testament, or an iota in Greek. But the yod is the smallest Hebrew letter, and phonetically it is equivalent to the Hebrew word for hand, yad. So yod is yad, or hand. And so if you take that little Hebrew letter, which is a hand, figuratively, and you attach it to the Hebrew word for heel, the end result is Yaakov, Jacob. And so his name literally means hand on a heel. Now, why would they name him that? Because that's what he was doing when he was born. But I've always wondered, for years now, I've argued that the reason his hand was on his brother's heel was not to supplant, not to cheat, not to undermine, but to shield his head from being crushed by the heel of his adversary. Because Esau's heel is in line to come down on the top of that baby's head. And if that had happened, he at the very least would be, he'd have been injured severely, if not killed outright. And if something happens to Jacob, what becomes of Israel? And moreover, what happens to God's plan for overcoming the adversary in the world? Because God's always worked through people. So his hand is on his brother's heel. He goes through life as the one whose hand is on the heel. And his hand is on the heel to shield his head from the heel of his adversary. So then in Genesis chapter 27, when he is fleeing to Padan Aram, to Syria, because after he obtained the blessing, Esau has vowed to kill him. And so he goes to Padan Aram, and he finds himself in a place that was formerly known as Luz. And it's getting dark. And so he decides, I'm going to camp here overnight. And so it says that he took one of the stones of that place. He took one of those stones and he set it at his head. Some translations render under his head. Now, personally, I find it hard to believe that he put it under his head, because a rock doesn't seem that it would be a very comfortable pillow to me. Now, that's just me. Maybe you've slept with your head on a rock. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn. Some of the pillows, I throw them aside because they're hard as a rock. All right. So I can't actually imagine using a real rock. So maybe it's possible, maybe even probable, that instead of under his head, he set it at his head. In fact, the word literally means a headrest. And why would he set it at his head? Maybe it's to allude to the fact that he is the one having to shield his head from the one who wants to destroy him. Maybe it's alluding to the fact that he is trying to conceal himself and protect himself from the one who wants to take his heel and step on his head. That is Esau. I'll throw another wrinkle into this. The Hebrew word that is translated head, that he set the stone at his head, is actually heads, plural. He set the stone at his heads. Now, why would Moses record something like that? I'm going to tell you what I think. Because that stone is going to be set up as a pillar. It's going to be anointed. And Jacob said, this stone shall be the house of God. Implying, at least figuratively, if not literally, that what Jacob was doing was designating this stone as the cornerstone of what would become the house of God. because all this is taking place in what would become Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the temple would one day stand. And it was while that stone was at his head that he has a vision of a staircase, and at the top of the staircase is the Almighty saying, I am the God of your father Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. In fact, this is where he became the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he says, I'm going to give this land to you and to your descendants, and wherever you go, I'm going to watch over you, whether it's the north, the south, the east, or the west. By the way, Jacob never traveled the west. He went to the east and he went to the south, but he never went west. However, you, as followers of the Messiah, you who are Messiahs and the seed of Abraham, you did go to the west. You are in the west. In other words, that stone that was at his head is a picture of the Messiah, who was not only watching over him, but was already watching over you. You see, the shepherd of Israel neither sleeps nor slumbers. And in the book of Genesis, when Jacob is blessing Joseph, he refers to the shepherd of Israel is also the stone of Israel. And so again, what I'm trying to say is, or argue, is that that stone is a picture of the Messiah, because he said this stone shall be the house of God. It's almost like he was, again, designating it as the cornerstone. And of course, we know who the chief cornerstone is, don't we? Okay. So he goes on his way. He's got a promise that God's going to watch over and protect him. So he travels into Syria and comes up to a well. And he sees a young lady come into the well, and he instantly falls in love with her. Her name was Rachel. And so he goes to her father, Laban, and says, I love your daughter. I want to marry her. And he says, okay, well, work for me 7 years and you can marry her. No problem. So he worked for Laban for 7 years, and it flew by. The Bible says he didn't think of how long it was taking because he loved this girl so. And then at the end of the 7 years, there's going to be a wedding, and one night he's going to go into the tent and he's going to consummate this relationship. And it tells us that the next morning, behold, it was Leah. It wasn't Rachel. One day when we get into the kingdom, one of my questions is, how did he not know? How did he not know? But the next day, he goes to Laban, you tricked me. You deceived me. I didn't contract to work for her. I wanted Rachel. Well, you see, it's not good in our country for the younger one to get married off before the older one. And again, I think I said this last night. That would have been nice of Laban to bring that little bit of information up 7 years earlier. But he had intentions of deceiving him. And so what develops as Jacob is sojourning in Syria is that the one who is accused of being a supplanter, a cheater, a deceiver, is being deceived and cheated and falsely accused. As a matter of fact, the one who first accuses Jacob of being a supplanter is Esau. And Esau is the one that God says, I have rejected. And why did he reject Esau? Because Esau first rejected him. When it came to the birthright was no more to Esau than a bowl of soup and something to drink. He said, what good is it to me anyway? I'm about to die. And so Esau is the mindset to trade away something that is holy and sacred for something that is common as a bowl of soup. So Esau is the one who makes the accusation that Jacob is an accuser. Laban is the one who is cheating and scheming and changing his wages and abusing him. And what does Jacob do all that time? He goes out of his way to make sure that he avoids the very appearance of evil. If Laban's flock is harmed by wild beasts, he doesn't allow Laban to suffer the loss. He takes it from his own, and he makes it right. He stays out at all hours of the night. He's there in the cold. He's there in the drought. He never returns evil with evil. And so when Laban says, tell you what, you've satisfied this marriage feast this week, and let Leah have her week, then if you'll work for me another 7 years, I'll let you marry Rachel. I'm going to squeeze another 7 years out of you, but I'll let you marry my daughter. And he agrees to it. He worked another 6 years in order to obtain his flocks and his herds. And all the time, Laban's changing his wages. His sons are making these baseless accusations against Jacob. He's the one being cheated. He's the one being supplanted. He's the one being falsely accused. And the whole time, it's not recorded anyway, the whole time, God never spoke to him in this situation. And I find that fascinating because in Genesis chapter 27, he most definitely spoke to him in a very dramatic fashion. A staircase, angels ascending and descending, God at the top of the stairs talking to him. I'm reaffirming my covenant with you. I'm going to keep you. I'm going to protect you everywhere you go. But when all these things were happening to him, didn't say anything, at least as far as the biblical record goes. I've often wondered if God knew that Laban was going to deceive him, why wasn't there an angel standing off there in the darkness before he went into that tent to Leah? I mean, you know, Jacob, don't go in there. It's a setup. That's not Rachel in there. That's Leah. But he didn't. He allowed it to happen. Now, we could argue that factors into the Creator's plan. I mean, because from Leah comes Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, just for starters. Messiah. So it must have factored into his plan. But the point is that God observed. He allowed these things to happen. He allowed these circumstances to touch his life, and he observed. And I'm convinced, he was just waiting to see, is this man worthy of bearing the title Israel? Is he going to return evil with evil? Is he about community, or is he about being right? See, sometimes it's really important for us to be right. And sometimes in our effort to be proven right, we end up doing wrong. See, it's more important to do what's right than it is to be found right. Because if I do what's right, there will come a day when the righteous judge will make sure that everybody knows that I did what was right. And the same is true for you. And so he puts us in situations to see, are we going to combat? Are we going to be argumentative? Are we going to, well, you did this to me, so now I'm going to do this to you? Jacob never did that. And as far as the biblical record goes, we don't see God speaking to him until it came time for him to go back home. Now, I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 31. When the call came for him to return to Canaan, he gathers up his family, his wives, his children, his flocks, his herds. And when Laban is away taking care of some flocks and herds, he steals away. It's interesting. There's a pattern being established here as well. Jacob had to go away into Syria. He went out of Canaan single, and it's among the nations that he acquires wives and children and flocks and herds. In other words, it's among the nations where he multiplies, where he's fruitful, not in the land of Canaan. Later on, his descendants will be in Egypt. And that's where they multiply. They went down as 70. They came out as 2 to 3 million people. So this always struck me as kind of interesting that it's not in the land of Canaan that God's people multiply. It's in the other nations, which also is what's going on today. So he steals away when Laban is off doing something. And it's 3 days before Laban hears that Jacob is fleeing. Interestingly enough, later on, Pharaoh, who tells Moses, all right, you go and do as you said. Take your flocks, your herds, your children, go and do as you have said. Go back and read, and you will find that Moses never said to Pharaoh, let us go so that we can return to the land of Canaan. He said, let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness so that we can keep a feast unto the Lord. That's what Pharaoh agreed to. But something happened that alerted Pharaoh that they weren't just going 3 days' journey to keep a feast, but beyond that, they were actually going to go back to the land of Canaan. And traditionally, he overtook the children of Israel 7 days after they left Egypt. Laban overtook Jacob 7 days after he fled. Just kind of a little interesting tidbit. But when Laban catches up with him, he's accusing him of stealing his idols, and you've taken stuff and you've done stuff to me, and what? I've always just been nice to you. What's the problem here? Why did you steal away? Man, if you had told me you were going to leave, go back to the land of your fathers, we would have had a party. I would have sent you away with a big, nice celebration. Now, how many of you believe that? Jacob certainly didn't. He said, actually, if it hadn't been for my God and the God of my father Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed, because that's what you've done to me all these 20 years. You've cheated me. You've accused me of all these different things. You've stolen from me. I've never done anything like that to you. So that's the backstory that leads us to this point. Laban finally says, okay. Let's just come to some kind of an agreement here. Didn't hurt that the night before, the Almighty had visited Laban in a dream and basically said this, if you do anything to him, I'll hurt you. So here in Genesis chapter 31, verse 43, Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children. This flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? In other words, I could take everything away from you, but you're married to my daughters. You're the father of my grandchildren. So I probably won't do that. Now, therefore, come and let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. And so Jacob took a stone and he set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. They probably had some kind of a covenantal meal there. And Laban called it Yeger Sadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. Let's go to Hebrew class real quick. Galid, also called Gilead. Gimel Lamed means a heap, a pile, a collection, and by extension, a gathering. Because you can't have a pile or a heap of something until you gather that something. Make sense? So Gal, it's a heap, it's a mound, it's a collection, it's a gathering. Ayin Dalit, Ad or Ed, and it's a witness. That's the word for witness. And so what Jacob said to his brethren was, after he set up a stone as a pillar, then he said, now I want my brethren to go out here and gather stones, pile them up around this pillar, and collectively this is going to be a witness. This is going to be a mound of stones, and these stones are going to be a witness. Now, if you were here last night, what do stones represent? Okay. Well, we talked about how the stone, Evan, the word stone, is a combination of the word father and son. And at the heart of that word, that common letter, the beit, is a house, because the father's purpose from the beginning has been to build a house. And what does he build that house up? Living stones. You are living stones being built up into a spiritual house, right? So when Jacob says, gather stones, I want you to think in terms of a picture is being painted for us here. There is a stone that is a pillar, and all of the other stones are going to be collected, gathered, and piled up around this more prominent stone. And collectively, these stones are there to be a witness. So again, what are stones? People. So Jacob is saying there comes a time that we're going to have to gather stones. And what was he doing when it came time to gather stones? He was leaving the place of his sojourn to go back to the land of his fathers. Everybody still with me here? Yes. Therefore its name was called Galid, but also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take otherwise besides my daughters, although there is no man with us, see, God is witness between you and me. And this heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. Also, we see that this pile of stones, or these witness stones, also serve as a boundary, a border. If you and I are represented by stones in that we are living stones, if we're being built up into a spiritual house, the idea here is those stones have to be gathered. They have to be piled, if you will, or set. And this house would be a witness. This house would be something that would be a beacon to people who are in darkness, so to speak. But it also is a house that establishes boundaries, borders. In other words, when you pass beyond the threshold of this house, there are certain rules and regulations. There are certain statutes. There's certain lifestyle that is expected. There are certain things you don't do. And our life in following the Messiah, walking that one and only path that leads to life, has boundaries. It's a straight gate, and it is a narrow path, right? In fact, the better word is troublesome. Some of your translations render it that way. It is a straight gate and a troublesome path. All right, so I got to talk about that for just a minute. All right. The Greek term that is translated troublesome or narrow would be the equivalent of the Hebrew word zar. Zade resh, zar. And zar in the King James is translated as tribulation. Messiah said, in this world you will have tribulations. Again, the Hebrew word would be zar. Now, why is that important? Because from the Hebrew word zar, we get the Hebrew word zur, zade valfresh, and that's the word for rock. You see, rocks and stones are formed by heat and pressure and friction, squeezing. When the Creator formed Adam from the dust of the earth, the Hebrew word there, formed, actually means he's squeezing the clay. He's shaping it. He's molding it. Isaiah refers to him as the potter, and that we are the clay. Well, that harkens back to the very beginning when he formed man from the dust of the earth. He literally squeezed him into the shape and image that he wanted him to be. You and I are being conformed to the image of the Son of God. You know what that means? He squeezes us. He subjects us to heat, to pressure, to friction, to trials, to tribulations. That's how he does it. When do you typically grow closer to the Creator? When do you draw? What is the motivation for you to draw closer to God? Trouble, right? Anybody else besides me? Trouble, when everything's going wrong. Unfortunately, he has to do it that way because if everything's going great for us, we typically don't draw closer to him of our own volition. We kind of put him on the back burner when everything's going great, typically. But it's when trial and tribulation and hardship and being squeezed and pressed, when all those things are going on in our life, that's when we're motivated to draw closer to him. So that's how rocks are formed. That's how stones are formed. So we really shouldn't be surprised to find that if we are living stones, then we're formed and shaped by pressure, trial, tribulation. But I don't think we're just common stones. In fact, in Exodus 19, we're called precious stones. You saw what I did unto the Egyptians and how I bore you unto myself upon eagle's wings. Now, if you will indeed hear my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. You will be a kingdom, a priest, and a holy nation. Goy kadosh. Peculiar treasure, the Hebrew term literally means jewels. You'll be my jewels. Precious stones, emeralds, sapphires. The kind of stones that adorn the breastplate of the high priest, that which he wears upon his heart. Brad Scott's wife, Carol, I don't know if you know her. Has Carol been here with Brad before? Well, anyway, Carol is a geologist. And years ago, I asked her something. I wanted just to verify something. And that is, if stones like granite, marble, sandstone, these kinds of things, if they are formed and shaped by heat, pressure, friction, how are precious stones formed? And her answer was what I expected it to be. Even more heat, even more pressure, even more trials, even more tribulation. And we need to keep that in mind when we feel like we're going through you know what on earth. And we look down the street at our heathen neighbor and everything seems to be going fine for them. And we look up and say, what's the deal? Now, I do that. I don't know if you do that or not. Well, obviously, you're much more pious than I. But what I do is I'm like, hey, what's the deal? Well, here's the deal. He is shaping us into those precious stones. Now, that path, the one and only path that leads to life, the straight gate, the narrow or troublesome path, is a path that squeezes us. It's a path that is intended to squeeze us so much that sometimes it feels like we're going to die. But I realized a few years ago that when this is happening, he's not squeezing me to death. He's not squeezing the life out of me, in other words. But actually, he's squeezing the death out of me so that I can live. He's purging me of all those things that are still me, those things that, like the young rich man, those things that still have a little piece of my heart. He's squeezing those things out of me so that it will become possible for me to love him with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength. It's very uncomfortable. I don't like it, or at least my flesh doesn't like it. But it's a necessity if we're going to live, and particularly if we truly are a generation who are standing at the threshold of the culmination of the age. If we really are living in the time when things are about to happen unlike anything the world has ever seen or will ever see again, then again, we have to be those people unlike anything the world has seen or will ever see again. We have to be those stones that he gathers to build up into this spiritual house that serve as a witness to the world, but also through our lives and how we live our lives, we manifest and demonstrate to the world that the Creator has established boundaries. If you want to live, if you want to get to what is life and blessing, there are boundaries. And when I'm on this road, when my feelings are, my emotions are that I want to go a little this way, there's a boundary that says, don't go any farther to the right. Well, I have these passions. I have compassion. I have all these feelings of warm fuzzies and love that want to lead me to go do this or to think that. No, there's a boundary. Well, I'm angry. Oh, okay, that's fine. God gets angry too. But be angry and sin not. There's a boundary over here. And I have to stay within the boundaries and stay on the road that leads to life, that leads to blessing. Everybody still with me here? So I want you to focus in on this. Jacob said, gather stones. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Here's what I'm going to do. We had originally scheduled to go 2 hours and then break in between. Mark, if you're okay with this is what I'm going to do. It's 4:30. We were originally scheduled to go until 5:30. I'm just going to take it right up to 5:30 if that's okay. and then we'll kind of get right back on schedule. You all right with that? Very good. That's what I was going to do anyway. I just thought I'd throw it out there. All right. I want you to go to Ecclesiastes 3. And before we read this, I want to interject this thought as well. From the very beginning, we see that the Creator establishes boundaries. Now, this to me is a little bit of an irony because he, in his existence, has no boundaries. He has no beginning. He has no end. If I ascend up into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. He's everywhere all at the same time. He cannot be limited. He cannot be contained. He is all-knowing. He is all-powerful. He is omnipresent. He has no limits. In fact, in rabbinical commentary, he is regarded as Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end. And yet the one who is limitless, who has no end, who has no boundaries, establishes boundaries. In the beginning, he said, let there be light. And there was light. And he distinguished the light from the darkness, day from night. Boundaries. In the second day of creation, he created a firmament that was to divide the waters above from the waters below, so that the two didn't mix. A boundary, a border between the two. On day 3 of creation, he caused the seas to be gathered together unto one place. Dry land appeared. He spoke to the seas, according to Job, and said, you can come this far, but you can't cross that line. Boundaries. And when his creation, as we sang about tonight, Melody was singing that beautiful song about how the creation responds to his authority. They respect his authority. And when his creation operates and functions within the boundaries that he established, it's good. But when those boundaries are ignored, erased, desecrated, whatever, chaos ensues. So he establishes boundaries. He establishes borders that are to be respected. Again, in Genesis 31, that pile, that heap of stones that were to be a witness, were also establishing a boundary. When he took the garden and he set it in Eden, he said he planted that garden in Eden toward the east. The word Eden, loosely translated, is paradise. Paradise is a word that comes from a Persian word that means an enclosed space. Boundaries. That wheat field in the parable, I guarantee you it had boundaries. It had borders. And when he put the man whom he squeezed into shape, when he put him in the garden to tend and to keep it, it seems to me that what he was doing was appointing Adam as a priest to serve in the first earthly sanctuary. Eden would correspond to the courtyard, the garden, the holy place, the midst of the garden where the tree of life was. That would correspond to the Holy of Holies. And so when he placed the man there, he appointed him, it seems, as priest. And as priest, he was to tend and keep that garden. The word tend is literally to work it. What was the work? He didn't have to sweat and toil in order to eat. That doesn't occur until after the fall. After the fall, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. But before then, he could freely eat of all the trees of the garden. Later on, the priests will not have to go out into the fields and toil in order to eat. They will eat of the portions that are being brought, that are sacred unto the Lord. When he was told to keep the garden, the word literally, as Gail mentioned earlier, is to guard or God. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. Sounds funny coming from a southerner, doesn't it? Not quite right. Gonna have to work on that. Anyway. But he was to not only do the work in the garden, and I believe in the role of a priest, but he was also to guard it, to keep it, to protect it, to defend it. Now, why does God tell him to guard it? Because there is an enemy out there who wants to come and steal, kill, and destroy, who is unrelenting, who is aggressive by nature. He is a murderer. He is a liar from the beginning, and he's not content to allow the tares to remain in their own field. And how was he successful in getting the tares planted in the midst of the wheat field? Because men went to sleep. Because they didn't guard. They didn't defend that border. How did the serpent get in the midst of the garden? Which would be, by the way, if I'm right about the garden being the first earthly sanctuary, would be the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. How did he get in there? Because apparently Adam didn't do such a good job of defending it. Not respecting those boundaries, not protecting those boundaries. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Verse 1, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. I want to pause there and just make this statement. I'm going to suggest that everything includes everyone. Again, everything includes everyone. All of us go through seasons. Individually, families, fellowships, and the body at large, we all go through seasons. Now, those seasons have a beginning point, they have a termination point. And when one season ends, another begins. Just as surely as fall becomes winter and winter becomes spring, in our lives, we have seasons. And if you read the pattern that is established here at the very beginning of Ecclesiastes 3, you will see that some of those seasons, bad stuff happens. Trials, tribulations. For instance, there's seasons when things are being broken down. There are seasons when things are being plucked up. There are seasons when we are weeping. There are seasons when we are mourning. Bad stuff. Oh, and by the way, typically we regard things as being good or bad based on how they affect our flesh. We do. If it's good, then it feels good to our flesh. If it's bad, it feels bad to our flesh. That's what we do. Now, I don't know so much around here, but in South Georgia, where I grew up, I remember the day that we got our first air conditioner. Now, that may not mean a whole lot to you, but in South Georgia, in August, in 100% humidity, and it's 95 degrees out there, air conditioning in that environment, good. In fact, it was when my baby brother was brought home. It was 1968, and it was a little window unit about this size. My dad installed it, plugged it in, and nobody left that room. Good. South Georgia, mid-August, no air conditioning, bad. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. How things affect our flesh tends to be how we define things as being good or bad. You agree? Okay. So there are seasons in our lives when bad things happen. Things are being plucked up. I would argue things that God didn't plant. Things are being broken down. I would argue things he didn't build. Unless the Lord builds the house. Okay. Messiah said, every plant that my Father has not planted will be plucked up. So we go through seasons when, quote unquote, bad things are happening. But sometimes we find that those seasons when bad things are happening, it's just the Creator's way of removing those things from our heart that prevent us from loving him with all of it. Removing those things from our life that are not conducive to life. Squeezing those things out of us that make it possible for those voids to be filled with his Spirit. You see, there is a time for every purpose under heaven. All of those seasons serve a purpose. And when that purpose has been served, that season ends. Another season begins. Seasons when things are being planted rather than being plucked up. When things are being built up rather than being broken down. When weeping turns to dancing. When mourning turns to joy. In fact, there's a rabbinic concept related to this. And I'll skip all the details of it to just kind of bring it to the most important issue. And that is when things have served their purpose, it is believed that God says in Hebrew, "Dai." Dalit Yud, "Dai." Now you've heard this word before. You're familiar with it because when we sit at the Pesach table and we say, had he only opened up the sea but had not given us the Torah at Mount Sinai, "Dai Yenu." If he had only given us the Torah but had not fed us with manna, "Dai Yenu." It would have been sufficient. It would have been enough. And so when God sees that a season has served its purpose, he says, "Dai." It's enough. That's sufficient. But I find it amazing that the Hebrew word "dai" is phonetically equivalent to our word "die." D-I-E. In other words, those seasons when he's plucking up, when he's tearing down, when we're weeping, we're mourning, what is he doing? He's bringing us to the point that we're saying, "Not my will, but your will be done. I am going to die to myself." In this, whatever area of my life you're working on, I realize I need to die to that. The purpose to serve. In verse 5, it says this: "There is a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones." Remember what Jacob said? Gather stones. What were those stones? Witnesses. Designating a boundary, a border. Solomon wrote that there is a season to throw away or cast away stones or to scatter stones, and then there is a season to gather stones. Now, again, rabbinical commentary suggests that when Solomon penned these words, he was prophesying about the temple and its destruction. Because when he built the temple, by and large, what was it made of? Stones. And remember, stones represent people. Because what was the Creator's vision, purpose for the sanctuary in the beginning? So that I can dwell among my people. So that I can dwell in my people. He didn't want to just live in a house of stone. He wanted to dwell inside his people. In fact, the word shkanti, that I might dwell among them. Shkanti, the root word shakan, means to dwell inside. And there's a very familiar word to you that comes from this root word. It's called shekhinah, or you might say shekinah. In Tennessee, we say shekinah. All right? How do they do it in Boston? No. Okay. By the way, Shekinah does not mean glory. It does not mean glory. It means indwelling presence. So then, when Solomon dedicated that house that was made of stone, and the Shekinah, or the presence of the Almighty, filled the house, the priest could not stand to minister. This is when he says, "If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves, seek my face and pray, and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land." That is stated on the day the temple was dedicated. But did his people humble themselves? Did they seek his face and pray? Well, eventually, no. And the evidence of that is when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came in and destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, carried off many of the temple treasures into Babylon, and he put them in the house of his pagan god, and he carried off Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He carried them off, and God delivered Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. That tells me that at some point in time, that temple that had once housed his presence, which was the purpose of that house, no longer housed his presence. At some point, his presence left. Likewise, in Matthew 24, when the Messiah tells his disciples, "Not one stone will be left upon the other," that temple was destroyed. And in both cases, we see that the stones were scattered. There is a time, there is a season to cast away or to scatter stones. And in both cases, when the literal stones of the temple were scattered, so were the people. When the stones of the temple were scattered, the people were scattered, because those stones represented the people. Jeremiah said in Lamentations 4, and I'm paraphrasing, that the stones of the temple are scattered about on every street corner. You can go to Jerusalem, and to this day, you can see where stones from that second house are still scattered about. And by the way, the people, by and large, remain scattered as well. But if every season is to serve a purpose, and as that purpose is coming to fruition, the Creator says, now this season's coming to an end, and now another season's about to begin. I think it's logical to surmise that soon, if not already, the Creator is no longer scattering stones, but like Jacob is saying, gather stones. In other words, the people are no longer going to be scattered, but he is preparing to gather them. That makes sense to you? I'm sure you guys sing These Are the Days of Elijah. I mean, we've been singing that song for 20 years. You should be familiar with it by now. And these are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. These are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And what are the days of Elijah? What is that about? Messiah said in Matthew 17 that Elijah will come and restore all things. Interesting. Elijah will come and restore all things. Now, he says this just after, on the Mount of Transfiguration, he is transfigured before Peter, James, and John. His face shines like the sun. His raiment is as white as the light. And standing there with him on the top of that mountain is Moses and Elijah. Moses and Elijah. Now, here's where we're going to go with this. Now, let's see. I already got about 30-something minutes. All right, can you think and listen fast? Because I'm going to talk speedily, okay? I'm going to cram all this into this. I know it's been a long day, and I know your backsides are talking to you probably about right now. Standing on the mountain with Messiah is Moses and Elijah. Moses came from the tribe of Levi. His father is Amram. His mother is Jochebed. We know where he comes from. We know what tribe he's assigned to. We know his genealogy. But when it comes to Elijah, we do not have this information. All it tells us of Elijah in 1 Kings 17, verse 1, Eliyahu hatishbi mitoshav Gilead. Galid. Remember what that means? That's where Jacob set up those stones as witness, as a boundary. Eliyahu hatishbi, Elijah the Tishbite, mitoshavi, of the inhabitants, Gilead. He was of the inhabitants of Gilead. Don't have time to really develop this here, but the word Tishbite is from Hebrew Tishbi. The word inhabitants is from the word Toshav, and here's how they're spelled. Tishbi, Tav, Shin, Bet, Yud. Tishbi or Tishbite. Tav, Shin, Bet, Yud. Toshav, inhabitants, spelled this way. Tav, Shin, Bet, Yud. What did you hear? Spelled the same. In other words, Elijah is not a Tishbite because of where he came from, geographically speaking. He is a Tishbite because the people he came from. And you can go home tonight and check me out on this. If you have a Strong's Concordance, look up the word inhabitants as it is found in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. Follow it out, find the number, go to your Hebrew Chaldee dictionary, and when you get over to the dictionary and you find the word toshav, look to the definition and it will say stranger, foreigner, resident alien. You'll let that percolate for just a second. In other words, Elijah was a Tishbite because he was of those who were foreigners and strangers, resident aliens, living in the land of Gilead. In other words, on the Mount of Transfiguration, standing up there with the Messiah is Moses, the natural branch, and Elijah, the branch that's been grafted into and become part of this family called Israel. And of the two, Yeshua says that Elijah will come and restore all things. If Elijah represents the wild branch that's been grafted in, and we understand that when Elijah came in the persona of John the Baptist, it didn't have to be the Elijah, but someone who came in the spirit and the power of Elijah. That when the prophecy in Malachi says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Is it possible that when Elijah comes to restore all things, it may be a person or a group of people who come in the spirit and the power of Elijah? And when Elijah met Israel on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18, all Israel is gathered there together. Ahab's there. The prophets of Baal are there. The prophets of Ashtaroth are there. And after the prophets of Baal have sat down, Elijah steps up to the people and said, how long are you going to go back and forth between two opinions? If the Lord is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. In other words, quit being lukewarm. Quit being Laodiceans. Either be hot or be cold, but quit being lukewarm. You're going to have to make a decision what you're going to do today. Because you see, we're at war with an adversary who is very clever. And he is good at exploiting our weaknesses, our apathy, our willingness to just go to sleep, let our guard down. And when he does that, he likes to mix things that are good with those things that are evil. And he likes to seduce us to look at that tree and see things in a mixed way and partake of that. That was Elijah's message. You're eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're at war with the adversary. You've fallen into his trap. Make up your mind. And then it says that Elijah went over and he started gathering stones. He started gathering stones according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he took those stones and he repaired the altar of God that had been broken down. And if the altar had been broken down, that would insinuate that the stones that had been there had been scattered. So what is Elijah doing? He is gathering, not scattering. And if we are living in the days of Elijah, and I believe the song is pretty accurate, frankly, I believe it is descriptive of the times, the season that we're in, that I'm arguing that the Creator is no longer scattering stones. He's no longer scattering his people. He is gathering his people. But from the beginning, he's always worked through people. So what should we be doing today? If he's gathering, should we be scattering? No, we should not. It's really important to understand the season in which you're living. Probably not the best time of year to plant a garden right now. What do you think? Not going to work, is it? Because it's not the right season. I need to be able to discern the seasons if I'm going to have a successful garden. Likewise, if I'm going to fulfill God's purpose in my life, if we're going to fulfill God's purpose in our lives, then we need to discern the season. There's a group of people that came to Yeshua in Matthew 16 and said, we want a sign from you. I'm not going to give you any more signs except the sign of the prophet Jonah. However, I have a question for you. How is it that you can look at the sky and tell me what the weather is going to be like tomorrow, but you are unable to discern the signs of the times? Now, what does that tell me? We should be able to discern the signs of the times. We should be able to understand the season in which we're living. And again, if we have seen that he is scattered, then I'm going to suggest we are coming into a season when he is gathering. And what does this have to do with unity? I think it should be obvious, but just in case, when we're not striving for unity, when we're not striving to do what's right, but actually to be found right, when we are not striving to come together, but are insisting that you see things my way, you conform to my way of thinking, my form of dress, my way of talking, and we create division, when we create strife, doesn't that equate to scattering? Now, mind you, there are things to separate over. I don't believe in unity at all costs. I do believe in the unity of the faith. There are some things that we have to, differentiate on. But my point is, if he's gathering, that's what we need to be doing too. If his heart is to gather, that's what our heart should be as well. And Elijah was gathering stones. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. Verse 1. Then Yeshua went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Yeshua said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be brought down or thrown down. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? He had just told them, and I'm going to put it in an American context. He had just told them that Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, LA, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, that in a decade they'd all be destroyed and be a pile of rubble. And the nation that you've known would cease to exist as you have known it. And most of your friends, your neighbors, your family, people you work with would either be dead or in captivity. That's what he told them. And if I told you that, if I was being serious about that, I think a lot of us would have a hard time wrapping our brain around that. But that's exactly what he told them. And so obviously their interest is piqued, and they want to know, hey, what do we need to be looking for? What are the signs of this? And what is the sign of your coming and the end of this age or the end of this season? There is no such thing as the end of the world. You know that, right? But there is the end of the age. And what is the age he's referring to? The age when the nations, when the Gentiles, or if you'll allow me, when Esau is stepping on our neck and head, keeping us down. When is that going to end? And when is the next season going to begin? The better season, when things aren't being broken down, when Zion's being built up, when you sit upon your throne, when you rule and reign from Jerusalem, when Torah goes forth from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. When are these things going to happen? When is this season going to come? I want you to notice, before he gets into things like earthquakes and pestilences and famines and wars and rumors of wars and all the things that we tend to focus on when we're talking about the end of days. I mean, at least in my background, that's what we focused on. I grew up in that Pentecostal church that I referred to, South Georgia. I mean, hardcore, holy roller, old-time Pentecostal. The older ladies wore their hair up in bobby pins, and they were hair and sleeves. They had their hair up and they had their sleeves down to their wrist, and the dresses that went way down, to their ankles, and everything was about holiness. And Sunday mornings, we would hear a salvation message, or we'd hear a message about, you backslider, you need to return to the Lord. But, it was pretty calm, comparatively speaking, because we had to get everything done by 12 o'clock because we got to beat the Baptists to the restaurant, right? And by the way, we never won. The Sunday nights, that was completely different. I mean, it was wide open Sunday nights. It was shouting. It was running the aisles. It was music just going, boom, 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 boom. We were having a big time. And then occasionally we'd have those Sunday nights when the preacher's going to talk about prophecy and the end times and the tribulation and the Antichrist. And, again, this was the days when Henry Kissinger was the Antichrist, right? What was the Thief in the Night movies? Anybody remember those? Yeah, okay, a few people. Those things freaked me out. Freaked me out. We used to have a song that they would sing on those particular Sunday nights. Oh, our Lord is coming back to earth again, to earth again. Freaked me out. And not because I was afraid of the coming of the Lord. I just wanted to have a girlfriend before he did. I just wanted to know what that was like. I know carnal, I know fleshly, but yeah, still, I wanted to kiss a girl. So can you hold it off a little bit? We focus on all of those things, the wars and the rumors of war. By the way, how long have there been wars going on?
Always.
From the beginning. How about famines and earthquakes?
Yes.
All of those things that we tend to focus on have always been happening. Now, to be fair, he says that these things are the beginning of birth pangs, which would insinuate that as we get closer to the end, these wars and famines and earthquakes and such, they would happen more frequently. They would become more intense, just like birth pangs become more frequent and more tense just before delivery. I get that. But here's what I want you to notice. The first thing he said to them was, take heed that no one deceives you. That's the first thing he said. Take heed that no one deceives you, which would suggest that people are going to try to deceive me. Isn't that what the adversary did to the woman? He deceived her. He didn't try to lure her into things that were obviously and blatantly wicked, because he knew that wasn't going to work. But what did he do? Keeping in mind that he's in the garden because Adam didn't guard it. But he ends up in this conversation with the woman, and here's what he does. He appeals to her emotions, her feelings, and those things generated desires. Because you see, she knew what the word was. She knew we were not supposed to eat of this tree. In fact, she went one step further. We're not even supposed to touch it. She knew what the word of the Lord was regarding this tree. But because she entertained the words of the adversary and it appealed to her feelings and her emotions, she allowed her feelings and emotions to push her beyond the boundary that the Creator had established. We live in a day and time when lots of people want to make decisions not on what is written, not on what the laws are, whether we're talking about biblical law or just the laws of the land. They want to make decisions based on how I feel, what my emotions are, whether it's compassion or anger. We make decisions as a culture more and more with each passing day, not based on parameters and borders and laws and boundaries, but on how I feel, my emotions. That's what got us into this trouble in the first place. And the really troubling thing is that there are many within the body who are doing the same thing. I grew up in a church. I can't tell you how many times people would say, to justify what they wanted to do, well, the Lord spoke to me and said, because they wanted to justify what they wanted to do. So he said, take heed that no one deceives you. People will try to deceive us in this day and time. And he goes on and he says, for many will come in my name, saying I am the Christ, and will deceive many. I grew up being taught that what that meant was that people would come and claiming to be the second coming of Christ. Be aware, there are going to be people who will come on the scene saying they are the Messiah. Beware of those. Okay, that's happened. People have done that. Somebody comes to mind, it's Charlie Manson. 50 years ago, back in the 60s, he convinced a small group of hippies in California that he was the second coming of the Messiah. Now, have to take into consideration that these people he convinced of that were dropping acid and smoking dope. They weren't really grounded in this. David Koresh convinced a group of people that he was the second coming of Messiah. But again, I'm going to argue people that probably weren't grounded in the word. My point, if you know what this book says, no guy's going to come along and convince you that he's the second coming of the Messiah. You're not going to fall for that. So maybe that's not what the Messiah was saying. Maybe he was saying that people are going to come representing me, and they're going to tell you, yeah, I'm the Messiah. But they're going to deceive many people nevertheless. How would they be able to do that? Paul wrote to Timothy, and I want to paraphrase in 2 Timothy chapter 4, he says, now look, there's going to come a day when people will not endure sound doctrine. He's not talking about the world. He's talking about God's people. That there would come a day when they would not be able to endure sound doctrine. Just as the children of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai could not endure what was commanded, according to the writer of Hebrews, chapter 12, there will come a day when God's people, or some of God's people, will not be able to endure sound doctrine. And because they have these desires, by the way, usually generated by feelings and emotions, because they have these desires, they will go find teachers that will tell them what they want to hear. They'll want to have their ears scratched. They'll want to be justified in what they're doing, what they're saying. If I may put it in a Hebrew roots context, if I wanted to take the position that you have to say the name this way, and you have to believe a day begins here, and you have to do Passover on such and such a day, and forget what all these other people are saying about these different things. If I wanted to take a hardline position on some of these things, I could go find a congregation that would tell me what I wanted to hear. I could go find a ministry that would tell me what I wanted to hear and justify my contempt, justify my anger, justify my arrogance and my pride. It's not just talking about mainstream Christians, in other words, ladies and gentlemen. People, because they want to do what they want to do, they will find somebody that will tell them what they want to hear because they cannot endure sound doctrine. And so that's why he tells Timothy, but you be watchful in all things. Do the work of an evangelist and fulfill your ministry. What does it mean to be watchful? To be on guard. Timothy, I want you to defend this. I want you to defend the truth. I want you to contend for the truth. I want you to fight for the truth. In fact, Paul goes on to say, hey, I'm about to finish my race and I have fought the good fight. That's what he's telling him. Because we have to defend this garden that's been entrusted to us. And the Messiah makes it very clear, as far as I'm concerned, that our greatest adversary is not the external foe. It's the foe that's within us. It's the adversary within, the tares in the midst of the wheat. And how does it get there? Because we don't contend for the faith. We don't defend those boundaries. We're not watchful in all these things. On the eve of his crucifixion, the Messiah took his disciples and they went into a garden. And they went into the garden, and most of the disciples stayed on the outer part of the garden. A select few went a little farther into the garden, and the Messiah went a stone's throw away, shall we say, into the midst of the garden. And he left his disciples two instructions: watch and pray, both of which required them to remain awake. Watch and pray. What was he telling them? You need to be in prayer and you need to be on guard. You need to be ready because there's an adversary out there. Things are getting ready to happen. 3 times he came back and found them doing what? Finally, he just says, sleep on. Spirit's willing, flesh is weak. But ironically, even though the flesh was weak, which one? Won out. Flesh. I don't think that's just something that happened. I think that is something that happens and is happening. And that's why the Messiah said, take heed that no one deceives you. Go with me to 2 Thessalonians real quick. You still with me? I got 15 more minutes. I promise I'm going to conclude by 5:30. We're going to be right on time. But 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Verse 1. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah and our gathering together to him. What season are we in now? Scattering or gathering? And if he's gathering, what should we be doing? gathering with him. And it's really important to understand what season we're in. Let me go on a little sidebar here for just a second. I won't go there again for the sake of time, but in Matthew chapter 23, the Messiah says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who stone the prophets and kill those sent to her. How I longed to gather you together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, and heretofore you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." By the way, just days before, when he was riding into Jerusalem on the donkey, they were cutting down palm branches, and the young people were saying, Hoshana, Hoshana, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But what did the leaders do? Rebuke your disciples. Listen to what they're saying. They're hailing you as king. Rebuke them. In other words, you're not the king. So what does he say in Matthew 23? I wanted to gather you. Isn't that what he said? Now, was he just playing with them, or did he really mean it? He wanted to gather them, but because they were not willing to be gathered, what happened to them? They were scattered. It was a consequence of them not willing to be gathered. And so he says, so now you're not going to see me until you say, you're the king, come save us. That's essentially what he was telling them. My point, it's really important for us to discern the seasons that we're in. And if he's wanting to gather, we had better be willing. And unity of the faith and coming together as people of God to be one is being gathered. It's a component of being gathered. And so in reality, when he is wanting us to be gathered and he is wanting us or calling us to come into the unity of the faith, to dwell together in unity, and we resist that and we fight against us and we dig in our heels and say, no, I'm right. We're doing, in effect, the same thing that they did 2,000 years ago. Do you know that the children of Israel wandered an additional 38 years in the wilderness that they did not have to? Why? Because they resisted what God was wanting to do. He wanted them to go into the land, and they said, you know, we can't do it because there's a bunch of giants over there and a bunch of fortified cities, and our brethren have discouraged our hearts. God brought us out here in the wilderness to die. He brought us through all of the things that he did, redeemed us, brought us through the Red Sea, fed us with manna, gave us water, met with us on Mount Sinai, did all those things in order to bring us out here to kill us. That was their logic. Now, of course, if you and I had been there, we would have straightened them out, wouldn't we? We would have helped them see, you're a bunch of numbskulls. What are you doing here? Because none of us have ever thought things like that, have we? Consequences for not recognizing the time of our visitation. Consequences for not recognizing the season. If he's gathering, that is to say, he is calling us to come together, to be gathered together, to become one, to dwell in unity. We'd better get on the bandwagon. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Messiah had come. And then he goes on to say, don't let anybody deceive you. And then he talks about the son of perdition. This one we know as the Antichrist. And then in verse 7, he says this, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he's taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they didn't receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. There's two things that I want to quickly address here. Lawlessness. The term in Greek is anomia. Nomia is the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word Torah. So lawlessness is this. Torahlessness. What is the Torah? What is the Torah? It's the boundaries. It defines the boundaries that you and I are to live between. You do this, you don't do that. You observe this. In this situation, this is how you respond to it. It allows for us a little latitude, but it gives us boundaries in how we are to live our life. And we don't turn to the right and we don't turn to the left. And so then, if that's true, then lawlessness is borderless. Lawlessness is no boundaries, no respect or regard for boundaries. Now, I know that some of you are thinking in terms of politics and geopolitical borders, and I think that, frankly, that is a manifestation of what we're talking about. But the borders and boundaries that I'm really referring to is, for instance, God created mankind male and female. But our culture erases those boundaries and says you can be whatever you want to be. If you think you're a man and you were born a female, then by golly, you're a man. In fact, there is a person in California, I'm referring to them as a person because I'm not really sure what else to call them. But there is a person in California, go figure, California, right? Born female, thinks that she's a male, undergoes the procedures to become a male, and then after she's a male, marries a male. After she marries the male, she convinces herself that she is a dog. You heard me right. Dog. Or in Tennessee, it's dog, but I'm trying to correct it so you can understand what I'm talking about. A dog. And so her husband/owner puts a collar and a leash on her. She puts a mask on her to resemble a dog. On all fours, he takes her to the doggy park so she can play with all the other dogs while he talks to all the other owners, and she acts like she's a dog. That's insane. But that is a very dramatic example, mind you, but that is an example of the boundaries being erased. God says that marriage is a man and a woman. One man, one woman. What does our culture say? Whatever we want it to be. Erasing the boundaries. No regard for borders. That is lawlessness. And here's the point I wanted to make. When the Antichrist comes, who is the lawless one, the son of perdition, he does not create lawlessness. The environment of lawlessness creates him. In other words, the Creator says, you want lawlessness? You're going to have it. You want to reject the truth? You're going to believe that a lie is the truth. And he does this, it says, because they did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Literally translated, that would say this. They looked favorably upon injustice. They looked favorably upon injustice. Let me give you this scenario to kind of demonstrate what that really means. If someone's accused of some kind of a sin or transgression, they're brought before the congregation, there's a criteria that has to be met. There have to be at least 2 witnesses, and those 2 witnesses have to bring corroborating evidence. In other words, they can't disagree with one another, right? That happens, then we can render a judgment. Has nothing to do with whether the person's innocent or guilty, has to do whether or not we can render a judgment. You have to have those 2 corroborating witnesses, right? Yes. Thank you. Wasn't a trick question. All right. All right, but what if we only have 1? Can't render a judgment. What if the 2 disagree with one another? Can't do it. But what if we do it anyway? What would we call that? If we only had 1 witness and we went ahead and rendered a judgment, what would that be called? It wouldn't be justice, it would be injustice. And then what if we looked favorably upon that? Now, let me give you a real life scenario. A judge is nominated for the Supreme Court. An accuser comes forward and says he did this. Says these other people know about it because they were there. They were witnesses too. But those other witnesses said, we don't know what you're talking about. We weren't there. Other people say, yes, he's that kind of a person. Come to find out, they made it up. And at the end of the day, you've got one person bringing an accusation. Can we render judgment? But we did. And there were people who looked favorably upon it. Would that be a fairly accurate assessment? And by the way, there is a Hebrew word pronounced kavanah. And it means the intent of the heart. And so I'm going to suggest that God was demonstrating through that whole process where our hearts really are. This is what's prevailing in our culture today. And this is, and I know I'm about out of time here, but this is what the nations are wanting to impose upon you and me as God's people. You know why? Because the adversary wants us to stay scattered. He doesn't want us to be gathered. Because when the Creator starts gathering his people this last time around the Messiah, that stone, that was set up, and we're gathering stones around that pillar, he knows his time's up. He's in trouble. So he wants to keep us trampled down and scattered and under his heel. But the Messiah is going to bring an end to that. Now, I could spend a lot more time on this, but I'm not. I am going to try to be true to my word. And I know it's been a very, very long day, but I do want to share this one last thing with you. The nations are at war with God and the Messiah. And God said that you and I, as the people of God, are at war with the adversary and his seed. God works through people. And one day, he is going to bring an end to this dominion, if I can use that word, that the nations are wanting to impose upon his people, trampling his people down. Whether we're talking about Jerusalem, Israel as a geopolitical entity, or God's people at large. Let me put it to you this way. Do we tell them what to say, when they can say it, how they can say it, where they can say it, or do they try to tell us what we can say, when we can say, where we can say it? In other words, they're kind of wanting to keep us trampled down, right? Now, what is the Creator trying to do? He's trying to gather us, right? The Messiah said that Jerusalem was going to be trampled down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And the times of the Gentiles, that season is going to come to a conclusion when he comes to rule and reign. In other words, who's going to bring an end to the exile? Messiah is. Okay? No doubt about it. Yeshua is going to bring an end to the exile. So, again, I'm going to leave you with this, kind of leave you hanging. I guess I'll be back in about 8 years to finish up with you. But I want you to think about this. A story that most of us heard as little kids. David and Goliath. You know the story. But the story is not just a record of something that happened long ago. It's a prophecy. The prophecy is this. The name Goliath, Goliath in Hebrew, Gimel Lamed Yod Tav, Goliath, is derived from the same root word that we get our term galut. Gimel Lamed Vav Tav. And galut is the Hebrew word for exile. In fact, this season that we're in right now, in rabbinical commentary, it is referred to as Galut Edom. Galut, or the exile of Edom. In other words, Esau's got us under his heel. He's trampling on us. He's trampling on Zion. He's trampling on Jerusalem. The nations are trampling on God's people. When Jerusalem or Israel comes up before the United Nations, what do? They try to trample them down. When we stand up and say, you know what, this is the word of God, what do the nations do? They try to trample us down. It's called Galut Edom, or the exile of Edom. Esau is seen as trying to keep Jacob under his heel, trying to kill him. So Goliath is a picture of the exile, and he's very imposing. He's a big guy. He's a champion. He's fought a lot of battles, won a lot of battles. Israel's over on the other side of the field, afraid. Goliath's out there taunting the armies of the Most High God, defying the armies of Israel. Won't there be someone to come out and fight me? And even the king wouldn't dare do it. So Jesse sends his youngest son to the battlefield to bring some lunch to his brothers. He hears this uncircumcised Philistine out there taunting the armies of the Most High God. And he's saying, man, why isn't somebody out there shutting this guy up? Are you kidding? Look at him. Well, look, you know what? I fought the lion, I fought the bear. When they've snatched a lamb from my father's flock, I chased them down. I got my lamb back. And if that lion or bear wanted to rise up against me, I just took him by the beard and I killed him. God has delivered me from the paw of the bear and from the paw of the lion, and he will deliver me from the paw of this uncircumcised Philistine. See, David recognized something about Planned Parenthood and the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the ACLU and Code Pink and the Antifas and the communists and the Marxists and the borderless and the globalists. He recognized they were uncircumcised. They had no covenantal protection. They didn't have any defense. They had a weak point. And so David says, I'll go fight them. But now David is a picture of someone too. He's a picture of the son of David, the Messiah. Because he's going to go out and he's going to bring an end to the exile. God's people over here cowering because they don't have the strength, they don't have the courage to do this and say, I'm going to go do it. So David walks out there and he tells that giant, you know, you come to me with a spear and a javelin and all this stuff. I come to you with a staff and a sling, and I'm coming in the name of the Lord whose armies you've defied, and I'm going to take your head from you, and I'm going to feed your flesh and the flesh of all your buddies to the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air. And when I get through doing that, the world will know that there is a God in Israel. So David, Messiah, goes out to face the giants because God's people have always had a problem with giants. He goes out to face the giants and he's going to take him down. But here's how he did it. He went to the brook and he gathered stones. David brought Goliath down. But what did he use to bring it down? Messiah brings an end to the exile. But is it possible he uses people, stones that he's gathering who are willing to be servants, who are willing to be placed in his sling that he skillfully wields against the giants of our day to bring them down? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, in our being gathered together, we are to be his witnesses. We are to be witnesses of the resurrected Messiah. The world wants you to sit down, shut up, and go away. But what the Creator is calling us to do as we are being gathered is to stand. And when we've done all we can do, we stand. And we defend that which has been entrusted to us. And we fight for what has been entrusted to us. And we contend for the kingdom of heaven. And we're not going to be intimidated into silence. Those are the people that he's gathering. Because I'm convinced he's going to use them as stones to bring down the giants and the fortified cities and the strongholds and all the things that intimidate so many of God's people, intimidating them into silence. So everything that he's doing in the earth, it seems to me that he's always called upon his people to be willing to fight, but always with this promise: be strong and of good courage, because I've already gone before you. I've already won the battle. I just need you to follow behind me and demonstrate that you trust, you believe, and you have confidence in everything I've said. Caleb said, we can do this. You know why? Because Caleb had a different spirit. Amen? Shavua Tov.
Hallelujah. Are you pumped up? Hold on a second. All right, thank you, Bill. I'm ready to march out, man. But before I do that, I want to give you a gift. Oh, okay. From Live How Loud. That's for Brandon Melody. They're racking it up tonight. Come on up. We have a gift for you guys too. And I think this is for you. Make sure your name's on there. Yeah, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming out and doing this. Thank you. Not only are they our worship leaders and the newlyweds, they will give you another gift.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good having you guys here. Two more gifts from Lev Haolam. We want to honor our elders among us. If you're 90 and older, stand up if you can. We have any 90-year-olds here? How about 80-year-olds? Any 80-year-olds? All right, I guess 75. 77, all right. Anybody older than 77? All right, I have two of them. Anybody 76? 75. Well, we got, all right, come on forward. God bless you both. Hey, it's been a fantastic conference. Really, sincerely, it wouldn't be anything if nobody showed up. So thank you for coming out and being here and spending Shabbat with us. I do want to let you know a couple of things. You've seen the magazines on the tables. You're more than welcome to take them if there's one that interests you from Israel Today. Feel free to take one home. If you've not put your name on the email list, if you're interested, it's on the registration table. Right now, I'm going to call Charles and Isaac to bring forth a table. We are going to, while we're doing some praise and worship, we don't charge anything for the conference. There's no registration fees, but we want to bless those who blessed us. And so we have 4 boxes here, one for Bill, one for Brandon and Melody, one for James and Gal, and one for Lev Yeshua. And so we would ask that you just contemplate as we're going through worship, what the Father would have you do, and just come up as part of the worship. We'll dim the lights again, and you can go ahead and bless each of these ministries. And if you're going to make a check, it tells you how to make the checks out on the boxes. So, but we do invite you to do that. All right, that's a great act of worship, is to give. So, and then we will, as we conclude that, Brandon Melody will play a song, the Aaronic Blessing, and Bill will come up and say it in Hebrew, and then I will give thanks for our meal, and then we will conclude our conference eating. Good stuff, right? Thank you all. All righty. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right.
This is a song. It's called Hine Lo Yanu. Some of you may have heard it, maybe not. Passage that talks about he that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleep. And we added a little bridge to it, so we're going to play it for you guys. Elo Yishai Shomer Yisrael. Sing that again. Hine. Hine lo yanu velo Yishai lo yanu velo Yishai. Hine lo yanu velo Yishai Shomer Yisrael.
He that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, slumbers nor sleeps, neither slumbers nor sleeps. He that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, slumbers nor sleeps. I will lift my eyes to the mountainside. Where does my help come from? For the sun won't smite, nor the moon by night. For my help comes from the Lord. He that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, slumbers nor sleeps. And I will lift my eyes to the mountainside. Where does my help come from? For the sun won't smite, nor the moon by night. For my help comes from the Lord. Yes, my help comes from the Oh, come, behold the works of God, the nations at his feet. He breaks the bow and bends the spear and tells the wars to cease. Almighty One of Israel, you are on our side. We walk by faith in God who burns the chariots with fire. of hosts, you're with us, with us in the fire, with us as a shelter, with us in the storm. You will lead us through the fiercest battle. Oh, where else could we go but with the Lord of hosts? Oh God of Jacob, fierce and great, you lift your voice and speak. The earth that bows and all the mountains move into the sea. Oh Lord, you know the hearts of men, you still you let them live. Oh God, who makes the mountains melt, come wrestle us and win. Oh God, who makes the mountains melt, come wrestle us and win. Lord of hosts, you're with us in the fire, with us as a shelter, with us in the storm. You will lead us through the fiercest battle. Oh, where else could we go but with the Lord of hosts? The oceans roar, you are the Lord of all, the one who calms the wind and waves and makes my heart be still. Though the earth gives way and mountains move into the sea, the nations rage, I know my God is in control. The oceans roar, you are the Lord of all, the one who calms the winds and waves and makes my heart be still. Though the earth gives way, the mountains move into the sea, the nations rage, I know my God is in control. The oceans roar, you are the Lord of all, the one who calms the wind and waves and makes my heart be still. Though the earth gives way, the mountains move into the sea, the nations rage, I know my God is in control. 'Cause the Lord of hosts, you're with us in the fire, with us as a shelter, with us in the storm. You will lead us through the fiercest battle. Oh, where else could we go but with the Lord of hosts? You are with us in the fire, with us as a shelter, with us in the storm. You will lead us through the fiercest battles. Oh, where else could we go but with the Lord of It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. 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 It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you.
It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. 'Cause this is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. Oh, this is how I fight my battles. 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 This is how I. Right now we do one more song. This is called the Aaronic Benediction or the Aaronic Blessing. We jazzed it up just a little bit, but I hope we all like it, and I think my dad's gonna come and also do it, so.
May the Lord bless and keep you.
If everyone would stand, please. Hello there. And it wouldn't hurt my feelings if we turned the lights on. Well, Mark asked me to, I guess, officially do the Aaronic benediction. It won't be nearly as pretty as the way Melody just did it, but and I want to take this opportunity to say how much we appreciate you guys letting us come up. Mark, Joanne, thank you so much, and for everybody that was part of this, thank you so much. And I think I speak on behalf of the rest of my family over here. It's been a very enjoyable experience. I hope that it was beneficial and fruitful for you as well. Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichonecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sar Shalom. Amen. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And we declare this in the name of the Messiah, Yeshua, who is the Prince of Peace. And in this manner, you bless my people. And I will bless them, and I'll put my name upon them. Amen and amen. God bless.
Amen. Thank you, Bill. And I will just offer up a quick word for our meal. And then I do want to encourage everybody, the marketplace will be open. So please visit and bless these guys and check out what they have to offer. Abba, we thank you. What an incredible blessing this day has been. And Father, as we have feasted literally from your word, from our brother Bill, and through the worship and praise, and from Gail and James, Father, we just thank you. We thank you. We praise you. Now, Father, as we sit down and enjoy this evening meal, we just ask you to bless it to our bodies and all that we think, do, and say, pleasing in your sight. And Father, equip us to do great exploits on behalf of the kingdom because of how we've been equipped here in this evening. To you be the glory and power now and forever. In Yeshua's name. Amen. Thank you all.
Amen.
Okay, are we done?
We are done. We're just trying to see if we can find Bill Cloud to get him over here for 1 minute. That will be fun if we can get him over here. I have put my secret weapon on the task of doing that.
She'll do it.
Oh, she will do it. Wait a minute.
Can I call her secret weapon from now on?
Yes, you can. And now I'm up here. Hello.
Well, boy, that was great. Good ending to what he has taught all weekend. And by the way, we are still recording, so I can't do it right now. But if you go to the website, you can. I already have the first 3 broadcasts already up and ready to watch. So just go to MessianicLambRadio.com and click on the link in the bottom right-hand column. Says click here for archives, and it will take you right to all the sessions. As soon as we hang up and stop this broadcast, be a couple of minutes and I can get that embedded over on the website, and you'll have all 4 sessions. So anybody that has missed the last night and the earlier today or any of them, and you want to watch them at any time, share them with people. You can go to MessianicLambRadio.com and they're right there. So,
well, I'm going to go back and have seconds. That was a good meal.
I'll tell you, I agree with that. Joe, you were on Planet last week, and I have to say that a lot of the things he said, I wish I'd have heard this before we did Planet. As a matter of fact, we need to do a part 2 this week and bring a lot of this over to what we talked about last week. So don't you agree? I think
Oh,
it
yeah.
applies, definitely applies. So anyway, yeah, I've got specific points that I was listening to. His teaching on the heel, and that of Yeshua putting his heel on Satan's head, and then the teaching he did on Jacob grabbing a hold of the heel. Now that we know that, puts a whole new meaning on all that. I never saw it that way before, and now it takes on a whole different light.
Well, what was interesting about that too, that some people don't have forgotten as parents and stuff, is when a baby is being born, they have a soft spot. Their skulls are not completely sealed. They have like an opening. And when they go through the womb, it presses that so that they can go through the womb. So there's that opening that can hit and that heel could have hit the brain of Jacob's, and it could have caused even brain damage, So there's a lot of things that we forget when we read the story. We kind of brush it off.
So interesting how the Spirit of the Lord, knowing what was there for Jacob, protected Jacob. That's amazing. I love it. I just love it.
When he was talking about the piling of gathering the stones.
Yes.
He says, don't let the stone be stomped down. Well, one stone by itself can be stomped into the ground, but when you put a pile of many stones, it's very difficult for someone to stomp it into the ground.
Very good.
And it will be difficult to where then that person that tries to stomp it, or the enemy, as we discussed in this, when he tries to do that, he's going to get weary and tired, and he's going to give up. And this is why we are to unify, and this is why the Father's gathering his stones together.
I love it so much. All new understanding when it comes to stones. And there's so many different scriptures that talk about stones. And now it's a whole different way to look at it for me. I love it.
Rolling Stones.
That's right.
Amen. Well, we tried to get Bill Cloud to come back here, but he's exhausted and he's actually eating right now. So
he did a long. You heard it. I mean, it was a long teaching, and So I told
perfectly fine.
Yeah,
we'd love to have him here, and he's invited. But I think he's a little exhausted right now.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I'm exhausted listening to him.
It was a lot of information. The brain keeps on going, and but you're right. These archives are going to be great though, because then we can refer back to them and hear more about what's going on, and really say, oh, I missed that the one when we saw it at the conference,
right?
And really be able to write it down and actually even pause it, which is nice.
Well, there's a reason that church services only go so long, and certain teachings only go so long, is because we can only comprehend up into a certain point, and then it just you can't put all that together. So at least my brain is that way. I get tired after a while, and I don't know if you go to a Catholic mass, what do they last? 20 minutes?
Yeah, about that. 20 minutes.
That's about all they can handle. I don't know. Whatever.
I was at one that was at 19 minutes and 23 seconds. It was like a record. It was
now, if you're doing a funeral mass, those last a long time.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. Well, real good. I'm good. If everybody else is good, unless you guys got something else to share.
One last thing. Tomorrow is War Room Prayers, 7:30 a.m. Come join us for prayer, Abigail and myself. And then after that, at 9:45 Eastern time.
8:30, not 8:30, right? Eastern Standard.
Eastern, yeah 8:30.
8:30 Eastern, yeah. Don't say.
We're still in that central time zone.
we changed it, Abigail. We're doing it at
All right, you're
7:30
getting into
now.
my. That's okay. All right.
And then at 9:45 Eastern time is Let Us Reason Together with James and
That's right.
Abigail and Gabriel and
Remotely.
Kennard Levy Brown.
It'll be remote, a remote broad.
It will be remote.
It will be wonderful.
It'll be the Let Us Reason will be so will War Room. It'll be half remote, half not remote.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, but come and join us, everyone, and we'll have some fun reasoning together and,
Yes,
and
pray
praying
together.
Woo-hoo.
Yes,
Yeah,
hallelujah.
that's right.
And once again, on the website, as we speak, the first 3 broadcasts are already archived there. So if you're missing them or want to share them, you go right there and it'll take you to the page where the remote broadcast page is, and you can see those. And as soon as we stop this broadcast, I will go right to embedding it on the website. So it'll take a few minutes, 5-10 minutes before that's up. But there you go. Thank you, James and Gail. You guys are literally the best. Of course, there is no rest. So,
Wow.
we love you guys.
That's sweet. Thank
we
you.
love you
We
too.
love doing it.
And
it was
thanks for
fun.
coming on with
Yes.
us and buffering in between and talking about what the Father's doing. It's awesome.
Yep. A lot of work involved on your end. Joe, thank you for giving up your time doing this. Your reward in heaven is great.
Hallelujah. That's what counts.
Right.
And thank you for having me. It was a blessing. And
Amen.
James, Abigail, you guys are like rock stars to me right now.
Amen. Hallelujah. Well, we're all living stones. So
Yes,
it's a
we're
beautiful
just
thing.
doing
all
what
fitly joined together.
we're doing. What we are, the hope of our calling, Joe. Remember the hope of our calling? That's what we're doing.
Amen. Yeah. And y'all, you two are rolling stones because you got to roll back home.
We're not going right away though, but we're going to spend another night here, so that'll be good. Yeah.
We're not leaving until Tuesday morning, so
yeah.
Okay.
All righty.
God bless. Thanks.
All right.
All
All right.
Thank you. I'll let you take us out.
All right.